After using them as my go-to cameras for the last year, I'm going to give you my long-term review of the Nikon Z6 and Z7. Well, hey everyone, Hudson here. Welcome to Approaching the Scene. I'm going to spend a good amount of time today talking about 1 year on, what do I love the most about Nikon's mirrorless cameras? Why am I using them as my go-to? Why is my old trustworthy D850 that I still think is the best DSLR ever made collecting dust and getting ready for me to sell on eBay for Christmas shoppers? And there's a whole bunch of reasons. There's still a few things that I would like Nikon to solve via firmware or improve in the next version of these cameras, but overall I adore them. I've been using them for just over a year. I was looking at the first image I took with my Nikon Z6 was back in November of 2018, and it's December 2019 now, and it only took me a few months before I'd ordered the Z7 to go with it and really ceased using the D850 effectively. There's just a whole bunch of benefit to this system, and it was the first system that I used where I really fell in love with the viewfinder, with the electronic viewfinder. It seemed like a benefit instead of a hindrance. I remember talking about this camera's release back during my Mountaineer Near workshop, and even doing Approaching the Scene video with my buddy David, talking about having pre-ordered it to review, but fully expecting to not like it any more than I liked the Sony A7 cameras back then, and I expected to send it back. But I absolutely fell in love with it, and it's the cameras that I use now. I proved myself wrong. So what is it that I love about both the Nikon Z6 and Z7? Oh, and just a little teaser, you know, you look at the size difference is one of the big things I love. Both the Z6 and Z7 have exactly the same form factor, buttons, menus, layout, body, everything. There's just a 7 instead of a 6 and a different sensor in there, a higher resolution sensor in the Z7 and an amazing low light and great video camera sensor in the Z6, which I'm filming this with right now. I can't bring myself to film things with the non-Z cameras anymore, so the Z6 is filming this as my Z7. And I've got the new little Z50, and that's just a little teaser alert. I'm going to be doing a review of that in the coming couple of months. I just want to shoot some more with it and really have a firm opinion, but I've decided I'm not sending it back. Let's just give that as a little teaser preview. And if you think about the size, going from the D850 to the Z50 with the Z6 in between, size and weight is a big factor with these things. So we'll talk about that. Setting the little Z50 aside, the viewfinder is a huge, huge benefit to me with this camera. With the D850 and with all my DSLRs, I often use a tripod for landscape work or for critical fine detail work, and I would zoom into 100% on the live view and manually focus a perfect focus and check focus throughout. And to do that, you know, with my aging eyes, I'd have to get my glasses, my reading glasses, put them on to see the fine detail. And with this mirrorless system, not only can I check fine focus through the viewfinder with the diopter adjusted to be perfect with my eyesight, but I can go through the menus, change settings, check and look at the images that I had just shot, zoom into 100%, do all that without ever taking my eye away. And I've got the settings laid out. This is a very customizable camera to where I can access almost everything. I know where it all is at a finger touch away, and it's familiar to those of us that are Nikon users. It's that age-old, really ergonomic, easy to use, well laid out menu system and control system that, you know, I just touch a button. I don't even need to look out of the viewfinder, and the viewfinder is beautiful. It amplifies the available light in low lit situations to show me the scene brighter than I'm used to seeing through a DSLR. I can even, with its low light autofocus system, autofocus on a planet at night when I'm out shooting Milky Way, and it'll accurately focus the night sky. Pretty incredible little system. So the viewfinder is a huge benefit. I think the size and the weight are a second benefit that are common to both cameras. In this video, I'm going to talk about the things that I like about the camera, the things that could be improved, and also there'll be a little section where I talk about whether you should choose the Z6 or the Z7 if you're thinking about diving into the Nikon mirrorless system and what's better about each one. Each one has its place. So I think one thing that I love about the cameras is their color science and just the image quality straight out of the camera. I mean, Nikon's DSLRs have been doing a wonderful job with their color science and just how the images look coming out of camera for a long time. But with the Z6 and the Z7, it really jumped up a notch in my opinion. Just straight out of the camera, things look beautiful. I'm gonna jump over and show a few images really fast. So I'm here in Lightroom, and I've got this image of my wife, Stacy, and this is one of the early images I took back in January of this year. And you can see even straight out of the camera, the color's beautiful. This is a little bit retouched, but straight out of the camera, it was a beautiful image. And I've got a bunch of raw files here. This is from Patagonia. I haven't even touched this image. It's just straight out of the camera, maybe some auto adjustments and develop that I'll go in and take a look at. Here's one from Old Faithful. I just feel like the color science and the depth is wonderful. And like every Nikon camera, with the best sensors that Sony makes the sensors, Nikon puts the special sauce. The ability to capture highlights and shadows is just incredible. A second thing about these cameras is durability. And this image I captured at Thor's Well. I got around to the side of it. The wind was blowing from the north straight towards me. It didn't seem like it was blowing up that much as the waves would roll in, and some weird kind of combination of waves came in, and this thing jumped up and just poured. I don't know. It was like a coach getting just completely dunked by a Gatorade trash can. I mean, I had gallons of salt water thrown over myself and my Nikon Z7, and I thought it was ruined for sure. I did a video about this. I just stepped away from it, and luckily I had a Camelback full of water, and I poured about, I don't know, maybe a quart and a half of water over the camera, every aspect of the camera, open and closed the lenses, pouring fresh water over it. It was my 24-70 f4 lens, and I let it dry in the wind and just kept shooting, and there was never a problem, even though it was basically immersed in salt water. This was in Patagonia. We wound up staying in this spa resort right near the mountains in Torres del Paine National Park in Chile, and everyone in the hotel was running around in their spa robes, and we all thought it was so funny. We kind of, this spoof workshop photo, it was the only time we wore our robes was out here with our cameras, and it was very windy. It was a windy day, and I set my Z7 with my 24-70 2.8 FLED, the newest 2.8, DSLR lens, f-mount lens, up on my big Gitzo tripod, and we put a bundle of wood, a huge bunch of wood in my stone bag. And as we were getting everything ready, a huge gust came and it blew the camera over from this height, and it came down luckily on soft grass. And the only thing that was damaged on the camera was the lens hood for the 70-200 for this lens right here. It cracked this thing. I put a piece of gaff tape on it. It's a reason for always having gaff tape with you on trips, and the hood has been working perfectly ever since. But that's just a testament both to its water sealing, weather sealing, and its durability from impact. I mean, this camera has been both completely immersed in salt water and fallen from about 7 feet up and never even hesitated. I haven't even had it looked at. I think the ergonomics and the menu layout are just incredible with these cameras. I have reprogrammed them, and I'm not going to go into a whole bunch of depth here. There's a video, and I'll link it, where I go through how to customize your Nikon Z6 or Z7. But I've customized it. There are these little function buttons. There's two where the traditional depth of field preview button is. I've left the top one as depth of field preview, but when I'm shooting with this and I press the bottom button, it brings up my bracketing menu over whether I'm looking through the viewfinder or at the back of the screen, and the front dial changes how many stops apart each image is going to be captured, and the back dial changes how many shots I'm going to take. Am I going to take 3 shots or 5 shots bracketed around 0? Am I going to take 2 shots where one's on the light meter and one is underexposed? Am I going to take 2 shots where one's on the light meter, one's overexposed? That's all accessible, just blink. So if I'm looking at a scene and I think, ooh, this is a little bit tricky with the exposure, as I'm framing it up, I can just touch with my finger, roll the switch to 3, and it's already set for a bracketed set 3 stops apart. Boom, that easy. I don't even have to look away. I don't have to push any buttons, move any dials. The way that it works in still mode, the video button does nothing, but you can program it. So I have it programmed where the video mode, the back dial changes from manual focus the static focus to continuous focus, and the front dial changes the autofocus area mode. Just as simple as that. Without even looking away, I just touch that button and move my fingers to change the settings. And there are a million settings like this on this camera where it's just simple, easy to use. So many other mirrorless camera systems I've used have frustrated me with seemingly overly complex menu structures where you go in to change a setting and the menu's 3 levels deep and there's just more confusion to it. It's really hard to find where you need to change something. Sometimes it's in a submenu of a submenu. Things are a little bit clearer with the Nikon system. It feels like it was designed by photographers for photographers instead of by engineers for other engineers. So there's that. The battery system. One thing I love about the Z6 and the Z7 is that they're using the exact same batteries that Nikon's been using since, I don't know, I think my D310 used these batteries, and the D500 uses these batteries. The D750 used these batteries, the 610, the 600, the 800, the 810, the 850, they all used this EN-EL15 battery. So, you know, the 12 batteries that I've had collecting since I was up on Denali working on a documentary film all work in the Z6 and the Z7. That's brilliant. Love that. The FTZ adapter. I'm using an FTZ adapter right now with an old Zeiss 35mm f2 manual focus lens with the Z6 filming this. Here's the FTZ adapter on my 20mm Nikon 1.8, my Sunstar specialty lens. If I put this FTZ adapter on any of these wonderful Nikon f-mount glass lenses, from the 500, 5.6 brand new, sought after, hard to get wildlife sports lens, to the amazing 70-200 2.8 FLED, to the stellar kind of best portrait lens ever built, 105 1.4. All those lenses work brilliantly, just as well as they do on my D850. They focus just as fast, they meter just as well. It's brilliant. And I can, because Nikon has the shortest flange distance with its S mount, with the new mount for the Z lenses, you can adapt just about anything. So this is a made for Sony Voigtlander 10mm, the widest angle rectilinear lens ever made. It's a 10mm f5.6. And I've used that and had a ton of fun with it, with this just really thin, this little silver piece here is an adapter by TechArt that makes that Sony lens put right onto the Z mount. So people complain about there being fewer dedicated S mount lenses for Nikon. And it's true, they're building out that roadmap slowly. But this FTZ adapter opens the world to all of the epic Nikon glass that those of us who have been shooting Nikon for a long time have been using. I don't feel any need to get a new 70-200 because I love this one. And putting this little tiny guy on there doesn't change that much. So, you know, I think that what they have focused on is these just stellar f4 lenses, and they've made really, really high quality, sharp, lightweight f4 lenses. This is the 70-200. I mean the 24-70 f4. It does shrink as you close it. I think that's a benefit. It makes it even smaller in my bag. It's well made. It again took that huge deluge of salt water at Thor's Well when I got dunked and didn't skip a beat. It's got a really, really sharp image rendition, edge to edge, full frame on the Nikon Z7, even wide open. And I'll show you, I'm going to show you what I'm talking about, just how good some of these old f-mount lenses work, how well they work on the Z system, as well as how sharp their f4 glass is. And again, you know, I talked about it at the beginning. This is the 14-24 I'm used to hauling around on the D850. This is the 14-30, and not only is it smaller, lighter, nice and sharp, it takes filters, which is awesome for doing neutral density work with a wide angle. So let me show you a few more images here. This is some work I did. This is with the Nikon Z6 running around lightweight in Cuba with that 105 1.4 lens wide open at 1.4. You know, this shows you that you can track fast action. And I'm going to talk about autofocus performance and how that's improved with firmware in the Z cameras. This is with, again, that 105 1.4 in Charleston, South Carolina. Using my just fabled 20mm 1.8 stop down to f16 Sunstar lens in Moab and double arch as the sun is setting on the Z6 Z7 there. I'm pretty sure this is the Z7, yep. Or using the 10mm Tech Art lens adapter with the Tech Art adapter, that Voigtlander 10mm on the Z7 in the vessel at Hudson Yards in New York. Getting some ultra wide angle images that wouldn't even be possible without that 10mm. So you know, those work really, really well. And I've got another image in here. Let me go to it. I'm going to talk about it from another perspective too. But this image of the Ravenel Bridge in Charleston, South Carolina, from this year's Charleston workshop, you know, you see how sharp the middle of the frame is. Well, take a look at how sharp the edge is. This is shot at f5.6, and it's not much less sharp at f4. That's up in the corner of this little ultralight f4 lens. There's nothing that's not sharp about this lens. It is razor. So, you know, I hear people complain that you know, it took them a while to come out with a 24-70 f2.8 lens. I've used that lens. It's amazing. It's the best 24-70 2.8 I've ever used, but I don't feel the need to buy it because the 24-70 f4 is so good and so much lighter, and I would probably just use a prime if I need something any faster in those situations. I have a fast 35, a fast 50, and a fast 24-70 that works at 70. So looking through here, in-body image stabilization, that's another amazing thing. So we're talking about using some of these lenses like the 105 1.4. One of the sad things about the 105 1.4 is it has no vibration reduction. So when you're using it with a Nikon DSLR, there's no vibration reduction. You've got to be careful that you're not shooting much slower than 1/100th of a second with this lens. But when you mount it through the FTZ adapter on the Z6 and Z7, suddenly you get in-body image stabilization with that non-vibration reduction lens. So some of your epic old Nikon F-glass suddenly gets image stabilized because it's built into the body here. Customizability, I've already touched on that. This camera is infinitely customizable, and if you want to see how I've done that, jump into the video that I link on set up your Nikon Z6 and Z7. The focus accuracy. So I've done some work testing and adjusting focus, particularly of late, with my DSLRs and with my Z cameras. And the same lens, you know, let's say I'm going to test the 105mm autofocus accuracy on my D850. I'm using some really cool software from Ricoh called Focal. It's phenomenal. It's automated. You just plug your camera into the computer and put a target out and point the camera at it, and the software will do everything. But it'll tell me to adjust the Nikon D850 or the Nikon D500 that I have, you know, +10, -7 at different points with different lenses. And when I run it with the Z6 and the Z7, it's maybe +1, maybe -1. It's almost spot on. And the difference is that when you think about how a DSLR autofocuses, there's an optical rangefinder that's measuring the distance from that autofocus point is seeing to the camera through trigonometry, and then it's feeding that reading into the lens and focusing the lens to that distance. So those two different systems, the lenses focusing system and the optical rangefinder that's happening from the camera, have to be synced up. With the mirrorless camera, it's actually looking at edges on the sensor and making those edges as sharp as possible under the focus point. So it's focusing on the image, and therefore the potentials for it to be far, far more accurate. Now, a lot of people have complained about the Z camera's autofocus ability, and I will say that when it first released, I was a bit disappointed. It was fine for static subjects and landscapes and things, but following action, it had a really, really hard time. In the wake of their firmware 2 update, that changed quite a bit. It got eye detect autofocus, which is extremely accurate. It got a low light autofocus mode that I have used to focus planets like Jupiter or Venus, and you just put the fine AFS viewpoint, the fine single point right over that planet and hit the focus button and everything kind of slows down. It says low light focus and whoop, it nails it. Or in blue hour shooting where there's no way I could have used autofocus with a DSLR and you'd need to get it focused before it got so dark in order to be accurate and just wait for the light to get right. With this, it'll autofocus in near pitch blackness on a high contrast edge like the ridge of a mountain against the sky as it's getting dark, dark blue. The autofocus is really incredible and it's super accurate. You know, I still pinch myself that it's able to autofocus in such low light conditions that I'll take a shot, hit play, zoom into 100% to check it through the viewfinder with the diopter for my eye, and I'm like, wow, it's razor sharp. So, you know, I mean, it's making me more and more confident in its abilities by the day. The other thing that I've figured out with it is that if you're tracking fast-moving action, if you flip it into autofocus continuous and you move it to, instead of using dynamic autofocus area like you would with the Nikon DSLRs, where it's a either group or dynamic auto area focus, where you're picking a point and it'll pass the subject off to different points around it. If instead you choose autofocus area, AFF, in the autofocus continuous autofocus mode, so it's continuously autofocusing, it's never freezing on a static subject, and then you choose the auto area, which is just a big wide bracket, it's AFF. And if you're moving, tracking something that's moving, it'll lock that thing and it'll hold it really tight. It's way better than dynamic auto area. And I've really, really had great luck photographing fast-moving subjects like my kids in an amusement park on fast-moving rides or birds in flight. Let me show you. So here we've got, you know, my kids moving fast on rides at the state park. Wildlife that's just pausing for a second with the 500 f5.6. Birds in flight in Patagonia. Here are flamingos over the mountains, and even close up and tight. This is not cropped at all with the Z7. So those things are entirely possible since autofocus firmware 2.0 came around. I think the key is to not be using the autofocus dynamic area. You want to use the AFF. You know, we'll talk about some pros and cons of that. That doesn't necessarily work when you're trying to pick out a static subject against many, so you need to be flipping around a little bit more. But if you're primarily shooting fast-moving action, sports or wildlife, birds in flight, try that out. If you've got these cameras, you'll find that they perform amazingly well. I had some people that are longtime wildlife and bird shooters. I've shown them that, and they were like, wow, that's like a revelation. Video, if you do video, if you're a hybrid shooter or if you shoot any video, this camera is so much better to work with than the D850 or the D500 or any of the Nikon DSLRs before it. You just flip a lever on the back that's right around the display button. There's a big lever with a switch on it, and it goes from still to video mode, and it remembers all the settings that you had last time for video. It's going to remember your shutter speed and aperture and manual mode or aperture priority mode or whatever you're working with. It's going to remember your white balance. It suddenly flips it into a whole separate camera that remembers what you last used it for video for. It's so handy. If you want to flip back to stills, you flip it back to stills, and it's right back where you were when you were shooting stills. You don't have to flip a top mode dial by using 2 fingers. You just flip your thumb up, boop, and you're in video mode. Or remember, you wanted a 50th of a second to get that 50% shutter rule. If you know what I'm talking about, you'll know that that's super handy. Great focus peaking if you're in manual focus mode. You flip it into, even if you just start turning the ring, one of the new firmware updates is that the minute you start manual focusing, the focus peaking comes on. And it's unobtrusive. I leave it at its mid-level setting, and it's just a little bit of peaking. Other camera brands that I shall not name, seems like the whole screen goes blooming with glowing colors and distracts me from the composition I'm working with. With the Nikon, it's a little soft hint that lets me know things are in focus without completely distracting me from what I'm photographing. And I've got the 2.8 lenses that I've used. I've used the 70 to, or the 24 to 70 2.8, and I'm looking forward to the 14 to 24 and trying that out. They have a digital window, much like the Zeiss glass, the top-end Zeiss glass has, and it's so cool because it has a gauge of what's in focus across your focal distance. If you set that up to be the focus distance, it'll show you, that infinity to 2 feet away is all in focus, including the point that it's focused on. And as you change aperture, that line gets longer and shorter on the gauge. And as you change focus distance, it changes with it. So it really is giving you this beautiful visual representation of where hyperfocal distance is in the grand scheme, and whether your subject that you're focused on is within it or not. Just incredibly handy tool. The best implementation of that I've seen yet. So again, I haven't bought the 24 to 70 just because it's big and it's expensive, and I love this little lightweight one, but I probably will be buying the 14 to 24, and I can't wait to review that. All right, so let's talk about some ways that the Z6 and the Z7 are different and which one you might pick, and then I'll talk about some things that they can improve. All right, so let's talk about whether or not you should buy the Z6 versus the Z7. Obviously, the Z7 costs a little bit more money. That's what I've got right here. It is otherwise identical except for the sensor that's inside. So you'll find that if you're doing lots of sports action, wildlife, things like that, it has a little bit slower frame rate. It handles a little slower. The buffer fills a little bit faster just because it's got those big 46 megapixel files. It has more autofocus points, which actually I often turn off half of them so that I can navigate through them quicker. There's so many kind of edge to edge in the frame. Otherwise, they seem identical, but they're both good for different things. I'm filming right now with my Nikon Z6 because primarily it does a little bit better job at downsampling that 24 megapixel sensor into 4K video. This camera has 46 megapixels, which is a lot more resolution to chop out as it's creating video. And so it does a thing called line skipping, which just has a little bit less quality. So the Z6 is actually a little bit better video camera. It's also just incredible in low light. Now obviously the Z7 is the camera you want if you're doing big mural-sized prints, if you're working fashion or you're doing something that's a giant landscape print that you want the most resolution possible, or you're shooting a far distant piece of wildlife in great light, and you're using a really long lens and you're going to want to crop a lot. Well, it's got that resolution to let you do that. Let me show you what I'm talking about, the difference in low light quality and lack of noise in the Z6 versus the high resolution and benefits of the Z7. They're kind of two different purpose cameras. So let's jump over here for a second. I just happened to shoot both of these scenes with the two different cameras. One was on a tripod. This is in Jackson Hole this fall, scouting for a workshop this next fall in 2020. My buddy Rick and I were out at this just spectacular spot, the Oxbow, with the Grand Teton sitting out there, and there was just this magnificent kind of multi-layered sunset that happened where it seemed like it was fading and then it would come back. And this is shot with the Z6 at 2000 ISO. And if you take a look in here in the shadows, and there's a tiny bit of noise. This is the raw file. I've never taken it anywhere outside of Lightroom. It has a tiny bit of noise reduction in Lightroom. Could probably be improved with something like NoiseWare in Photoshop as a plugin. But you see it's clean. It's the fact that this is the raw file in Lightroom tells you there's just a lot of detail to work with. If I take a look at the Z7's image of the same scene at 1000 ISO, so we were at 2000 looking at it a second ago, and now we look at the big 46 megapixel file. Yeah, there's more resolution. There's also a lot more noise, and that noise is even leading to a loss of crisp, sharp detail at this point. So I don't think of the Z7 as being my low light specialist. I would much rather go for the Z6. And here's an extreme example of that. Here's one of a series of images that I took as part of a pano I haven't even assembled in Arches National Park this year of balanced rock, and we lit it with a couple of LumeCube panel lights. And you can see this is shot at 6400 ISO with my 14 millimeter Rokinon 2.5 SP, 8-second exposure for the Milky Way here. And as I zoom in, this is again just a raw file in Lightroom with a tiny bit of Lightroom noise reduction. In fact, I think it's just the default. I don't even think I've messed with this. And you see how clean the Z6's output at at 6400 ISO is. It's rather astounding. But you know, if you get into a scene that's got spectacular light and you want to potentially make a giant print of it later, all that resolution that the Z7 has, you know, that's my go-to camera in situations where I can keep the ISO down. So that's the real difference to me between the two cameras. You know, one is more of a landscape product, well lit, want lots of resolution camera. The other is a low light specialist and fantastic video camera. So I really use both of them all the time for different things. Let's talk about some things that I'm not so pleased about with the Z6 and Z7. And these are far outweighed by the benefits of the camera. Again, I have not gone back to the Nikon D850 because of any of these reasons. They're all really minor in my opinion. The first involves a depth of field view limitation that I've talked about in a video. I have a video called Please Fix This Nikon, and I will link it below, and they have yet to fix it. The engineers know in Japan. I've had Nikon USA talk to them, and I've had other people, Nikon Germany I know has talked to Japan. But the problem is that this camera displays the final, it stops the lens down as you're stopping the lens down. It actually physically stops it down as you're looking at the live view, either through the viewfinder or on the back of the camera when you're focusing out in the field, only to f5.6. And beyond that, it doesn't stop down unless you hit this depth of field preview lever on the front of the camera. And the frustrating thing is that I'm sure that they limited that for autofocus performance, so that the autofocus mechanism has as much light as possible coming in to get a crisp, sharp autofocus. The problem is that it continues to do it in manual focus mode, and you're unable in any way to zoom in to 100% view, where you're looking at just the 100% resolution view of the focus spot that you want in the scene, or the closest foreground element and the most distant element, and stop down. If I zoom in and then hit the depth of field preview lever, it goes back to a fit view where you see the whole image, and that part is not small anymore. So it's impossible to preview a 100% view of your scene at your final aperture. The only way you can do that is get it as close as you can get using the depth of field preview lever, looking at the whole scene at final aperture, shoot, then hit play, zoom in and move around and see if you've got it or not, and then adjust. It's kind of a multi-step process. That's how I'm doing it, and I find myself getting better and better at it. But it's a little bit of a step backwards, considering that the D850, the D500, the D750, the D610, all those cameras, you could, you know, look at it at 100%, change the aperture, and it would just live do it. In fact, if you hit the depth of field preview, it would open it wide up to get you a brighter view and less noise in your live view. It did the opposite thing. So I would love to see them just engineer that the other way. And again, well, you watched my video. It works differently in video mode, but it's not easy to flip back and forth from video to still mode, since it remembers all the settings from one to the other. So it's a little bit of an annoyance. The workaround is to just look at it in the full view of the scene, you know, focus a third of the way in, look at it with the depth of field selected, get it as close as you think, shoot it, then zoom in and look and make sure you've got what you wanted, and make adjustments after the fact. And I hope that they fix that in the next version. I think they could easily fix it in firmware, and I hope that they do soon. That's my biggest gripe. The dynamic area autofocus. If you were using a Nikon DSLR, and if you're used to it, it's very easy to track a moving subject by just picking a focus point in the dynamic autofocus area mode, and you select the target under the selected focus point, hold your focus button down, and it will track that subject as it moves around to the different focus points. Well, that doesn't work quite as well. It loses focus quite a bit using the Z cameras. It's not programmed in. I think that could be improved to where it's working as well as it works with the Sony cameras. The Sony cameras are quite amazing with that. Not only that, but it'll show a little green box flashing locked around the target, and that moves around the screen, and it does a really good job holding onto it. So Nikon needs to be working hard to catch up to Sony in that department. On the other hand, the AFF area that I talked about, the auto area, where you have no real control over selecting, but you're working with an erratically moving subject, that works quite well. And we're only talking about situations like that where the dynamic area autofocus doesn't work. So The only problem with this solution with the auto area focus mode is you don't get to select what you're first focusing on. It's just going to know if you're tracking an erratically moving subject. The computer makes decisions and it does a great job of it. If, let's say, the bird lands and stops at the nest and there are several birds standing around, you can't isolate the one that you want in focus. The camera isn't necessarily going to choose the right one for you. So that's where that customization comes in. I have it set up where all I have to do is touch that video record button on the top, which does nothing in still mode. I have it programmed to change the auto area focus mode. So if I tap that and roll that front dial one click, I switch to the small point focus where I choose my focus point and lock it in. If they start moving again, I flip it, I hit that button and move it back. So I don't even have to look away to change that setting, but I do need to flip back and forth. And I think if Nikon's gonna have that dynamic area autofocus point, it should be improved, and I'm sure it will be. But again, that's the workaround. Just flip to AFF and back to dynamic, AFF, back to dynamic. And those settings I talk about a bit in my how to set up your Nikon Z6 and Z7 video, which is linked down below. The viewfinder, the automatic sensor that flips it from the screen to your eye, I've had a lot of people thinking theirs is broken. And what really happens is there's a little sensor right here above the viewfinder. It's a little tiny, looks like a bit of glass above the square that's the viewfinder window. And you just, if you pop up on the little eye cup or the little soft eyepiece that goes around it, that thing's exposed. There's a little cutout for that on the eyepiece itself. And what happens is dirt and gunk gets in there and it thinks that your eye is in front of there and it just stops flipping. It thinks it's only going to work with the viewfinder unless you go to monitor only with the display button on the side of the sort of prism looking piece. So just wiping that out with a little rag. You know, I don't know what Nikon can do to stop that from happening, but it does get eye gunk in there and it just eventually, it'll stop working as well as an automatic switch when you put your eye up. It just doesn't recognize that you've done that. So cleaning that out is the key to that. They might work on improving that somehow, making it a little more sensitive potentially. There's no automatic zoom in to 100%. There should be a mode. Most of the other mirrorless cameras, the minute that you touch the manual focus ring on the lens, it will just leap into 100% magnification view of your selected focus point if that setting is enabled in your menu. And I would love for that setting to be there with Nikon. Instead, I've programmed mine where if I just touch the OK button with my thumb, it flips to 100% view on the focus point. And if I touch it again, it jumps back out. I think that's kind of unnecessary. It should just be that if I touch the manual focus ring, it leaps in to give me 100% view to get a razor sharp focus where I want. That's be something in the menu you can turn on and turn off, but it doesn't exist and I think it should. The single card slot, one of the biggest complaints about this camera, this doesn't really affect me. They use these XQD cards. They are incredibly robust, about the most robust card out there. I haven't really heard of one failing. I had one person talk to me about a problem that they've had with one. It didn't lose any images, but I need to talk more with them about it because I can't find anything online about any of these failing. They're just the most robust card out there, and I've never been a person who shoots to both cards. When I have dual cards, I just use it as overflow so that I don't have to stop and put another card in. And then as soon as I can, I like to get them downloaded onto my computer and put them on 2 different hard drives. I try to do that every day I'm out in the field shooting. But dual card slot, I know that for some high-end wedding photographers or fashion photographers, it's a big deal. And I think Nikon should add at least a second high-speed SD slot like they've done in their DSLRs. Preferably another XQD slot, they're so fast. Let's talk about the one other thing that I'd like to see, but it never will. It's the same with Sony, it's the same with the Olympuses, it's the same with the Fujis, all the mirrorless cameras that have the new digital mirrorless lenses, whether it's this really stellar 51.8 S lens or the 14 to 24 or the 24-70, any of the S lenses that I have, any of the new mirrorless lenses, they're focused by wire. This ring just spins round and round and round, and unless the camera's connected and there's a digital signal from me moving that ring, there's no connection to the internal parts of the lens. Now, if you contrast that with one of these F glass lenses, as I turn this, I can feel the parts in the lens turning. It's actually changing the focus distance, and there's a gauge moving on the outside of the lens. And what this means is that, particularly for video work, you know, if you shut off the camera, the power to the camera, it loses the connection to the lens and it forgets where the focus is supposed to be. And when you start it up, the lens goes and it switches and it maybe goes to infinity or maybe goes to close focus, and you've lost whatever focus setting you had. So you can't set up to say film myself in a specific position or an actor on a block or a product in a specific spot and then turn the camera off, change batteries, and go back and still have your focus locked. You have to go through the process of getting that focus back again by wire. You can't do accurate focus pulls where you set up a contraption that has a start point and a stop point and you just slowly move it. If you're making filmmaking and you want to change the focus from one actor to the other's eyes as the different ones are talking in a close-up scene, it just can't be done. You have to buy cine lenses for any of these mirrorless systems, and I find it just, you know, it's troubling doing video work and manually focusing these lenses for video work. So it's a minor gripe. Most still photographers aren't going to notice it. Most people that aren't doing video production aren't going to notice it. So all in all, you know, when I come down to the reason why this camera won me over, you know, starting off, I was pretty sure it was going to go into the return box and get sent back to B&H because I don't like it. You know, I had tried Sony A7 series cameras. I had tried Fuji's mirrorless cameras. I like both of those systems. I enjoyed them, but at the time, the Viewfinder felt like they were between me and the image. It didn't look as crisp and clear as looking through the lens at the subject. I had a harder time gauging whether things were in focus, what the colors were. I just felt like it was an impediment to making the kinds of images that I like to make. And I was fine with using the live view on the back of my camera to get those benefits like perfectly accurate focus in landscape scenes. When I looked through this Z camera's viewfinder for the first time, it was like, wow, this is so crisp and clear. It's hyper real. It's like looking at a high definition television for the first time after having had nothing but an old tube VGA TV, you know, a 480 lines of resolution television. It was just a stunning difference. And then using it in low light, I quickly started to realize, wow, I don't need my reading glasses to photograph anymore. Wow, I'm seeing things better. Wow, this thing autofocuses better in low light. This is amazing to be able to go through my menu settings without taking my eye away from the viewfinder. I can change settings and I don't have to look at the top LCD or the back to see what's happening. All the layouts are intuitive to me as a Nikon user, and the menu's really clearly laid out and solid and easy to use. Oh my goodness, it's working and adding image stabilization to all my old lenses. Sorry, this is just the future. And I immediately started using it. And the more I used it, every time I'd pick up a DSLR, it felt big, it felt clunky, and I would be hitting the menu while looking through the viewfinder and realizing I can't see what I'm doing. It's not there. I can't hit play and look through the viewfinder in bright light to see what I just shot. There's just all these things I would find myself doing, and I'm like, oh yeah, that doesn't work with this. And I felt more and more limited. Great camera, don't get me wrong. I still think the D850 is one of the finest cameras ever made. And I'm not getting rid of my Nikon D500 just yet because, you know, as nice as the new little Z50 is, it's not the D500. The D500 will shoot 200 frames at 10 frames a second without even having a hiccup, and it autofocuses so fast on moving subjects with that dynamic area autofocus and the group autofocus. It's a wonderful wildlife and sports camera, and the APS-C sensor gives more reach to my long lenses. So we're kind of on the cusp, but the minute that they come out with a D500 like Nikon Z camera, I'm there. So I find that people's arguments about the lack of lens choice specious. I think that there is an incredible stable of f-mount glass out there, and this 2.8 70-200 is no larger than Sony's Grandmaster 2.8 series, no less expensive or no more expensive, and arguably better. There's nothing like this 105, and they work perfectly with the Z system. There's no step down. You just have to have one of these lightweight little FTZ adapters. It's just essentially a tube that passes the electronics through. Simple, easy to use. I keep 2 of these in my bag on whichever f-mount lenses I have with me, so they just screw on like an f-mount lens. And I think that unlike other brands, Nikon's initial focus on making ultralight collapsible f4s that are razor sharp, edge to edge, wide open was brilliant. It actually saves weight in photographers like mine bags because they're an amazing tool that doesn't exist otherwise. You know, there's plenty of good fast glass in the Nikon stable that adapts perfectly to these cameras. So for me, these have just been a groundbreaking improvement to the way that I do photography and a way to lighten my bag. So hey, thanks for watching this. Again, I've got links to other videos that I've mentioned in here. Hit me up with questions. This whole Approaching the Scene series is nothing if not a conversation about photography, and I need your voice in it. So please, leave questions in the comments section here on YouTube. Hit me up online in any one of the myriad ways of doing that. I'm easy to get a hold of via email, you name it. We've got new workshops coming off that are about to be announced. I'm just coming off an amazing workshop season here in 2019. I think, Patagonia, Moab, all the way back to Charleston, just an incredible bunch of workshops with just such a fun group of people. I don't know how I'm so blessed to have such fun people to go out and photograph in beautiful places with, but let's keep it rolling. And again, hit me up anytime. Thanks so much. We'll see you next week.